Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I will be continuing my experiments with Aqua Cast and metallic pigment powder to create a really interesting effect on a candle tray. I'll also be making a candle vessel to go with it, and I will be decorating it all with temporary tattoos. If that sounds interesting, stay tuned and enjoy the video. An important feature of today's project is the metallic pigment powder. Mine is aluminium pigment powder from Resin Pro, and I've got a little shaker bottle which I've just had in my stock for a long time. I think it was from an enamelling kit that I had, and I'm just putting some of it into my shaker bottle. Once that was done, I put it aside and started preparing my Aqua Cast from Elichem resins. I'm using my Royal Coaster mould today from Moulds and Shapes, and I've already worked out how much of the Aqua Cast and how much water I need for it using the online calculator on the Elichem website. Now, I've wrote that down in a book, so I didn't need to do that again. I did it a while ago, and you know, it's easy if you write everything down in a book that you work out for each mould. It's always there, isn't it? Anyway, I needed 305 grams of the powder and 109 grams of the water. Once I'd measured it all out, I just gave it a good stir and it was ready to pour. Now, the Aqua Cast, if you've seen any of my other videos with aqua casting, you might be fed up of hearing me say this, but I'll say it again anyway. It mixes really well and really easily because you're mixing the powder with water instead of the thicker acrylic binder which you would get in a two-part casting compound. But the result is the same as you would get in a two-part casting compound because the magic ingredients from the acrylic binder have been fused into the powder. So that's why all you need to add is water instead of the acrylic binder, and it mixes so much better. Now, I'm taking some of it out into a separate cup because I want to colour some of it blue and keep some of it white. To colour my Aqua Cast today, I'm using the Royal Blue Resi Tint from Elichem Resins. It's an acrylic ink and it works very nicely in the Aqua Cast. The bottle has a very handy little dropper on the top, so it's very easy to just control it by adding a drop at a time. It's best to just add a little bit at a time so you don't end up with it too dark. And then for the white, I took some white Jesmonite pigment just to brighten up the white a little bit. It's not essential, but I had it, so I thought I'd pop a little bit in and just make that white a little bit crisper for my clouds. Okay, now it's time for the fun part. Now, my plan was to have the kind of handle end of my candle tray to be blue as the sky and then clouds going further up. So I'm just putting a little bit of the blue at the handle end of the tray. After pouring it in, I didn't move the mould at all like you would normally. You know, you'd tap it to flatten it all out and level it off. I didn't do that. I didn't want it all to spread out too much. But what I did do was I took my little spatula tool and started just pushing it to manipulate it into that cloud shape. I didn't draw the cloud shape on, if you get what I mean. It was just a case of kind of guiding it into the shape I wanted it to be. And so now it's time to shake on some pigment powder. And this is what I discovered for myself. I'm sure other people have done it, but it was a discovery for me in a previous video that this really works well. What happens is the Aqua Cast that's been formed into that cloud shape, it works kind of like a mask, and you'll see when it comes out of the mould exactly what I mean, but I'm just doing it over the edge of the cloud shape. I was having a little bit of trouble with that shaker bottle. I think the holes were just a little bit too small for the powder to get through nicely. So I was just tapping it on the end and it was okay. Anyway, once I'd done that, I carefully started adding some white. Not too much, just a little bit around the edge of the shape I'd just made. I didn't worry too much about any gaps that were being left because I knew that once I'd finished, I'd be able to tap it and it would all self-level really well. So I just guided it into that cloud shape again, just in the same way that I did before, and repeated the process again and again and again. After my last cloud, I added a little bit of blue that I had left over just at the top because I didn't want to waste that blue that I had left. Otherwise, it would have all gone wrong. I had exactly the right amount of Aqua Cast mixed up for this mould, so I had to use it. And then I just used the rest of the white on the top and gave it a gentle tap all the way around, and it levelled itself out nicely. After an hour, it was ready to demould, and I was quite excited to see how it had turned out. So let's have a look. And before it's out of the mould, I will apologise in advance for the lighting. I'm right next to the window in my new craft room, and yeah, I'm really struggling to film things well at the moment. But anyway, let's have a look. There you go. Do you see it? How the masking effect worked by putting the pigment powder on over the top of the shaped Aqua Cast. And I like it a lot. I think if I did another one, I would use less of the silver. It kind of takes over a little bit, but I really am pleased with the effect. I think it might actually work well if I used kind of a creamy pigment powder so that it was a very subtle contrast between the white and then you get like a shadowing effect and a more natural looking cloud. But anyway, we'll go back to that shortly. Next job was to make my candle vessel. I mixed up my Aqua Cast in just the same way as before, added a bit of white Jesmonite pigment just like before, and the mould I'm using is actually the base of my mushroom mould, which I got from Let's Resin. It's a mushroom jar mould, and the base of it for the jar is just a perfect shape for a candle vessel. So that's what I've got there. I wanted the candle vessel to be a good match for the tray. So again, I'm using the aluminium coloured pigment powder. I sprinkled a little bit on before adding any of the Aqua Cast, and then added some Aqua Cast a little bit at a time and did the layers just in the same way. So I did a bit of white, a bit of the pigment powder, then a bit of white and a bit of the pigment powder. And the good thing about adding it a little bit at a time is you can keep on banging it and tapping it to get rid of any bubbles. Now, another good thing that you're about to see is the thing with Aqua Cast is if you find that it's a little bit too thick for what you're doing, you can just add a little bit more water. That's the beauty of it, because all the properties that you need there are in the powder and not the liquid. Adding more or less water doesn't make any difference to the finished properties. So yeah, you can make it thinner if you want it thinner, or thicker if you want it thicker, just by controlling how much water you put in. So that's what I just did, because it was a bit thick. I did a bit of water and then it came out much nicer. Once I'd finished with the white, I got my royal blue resi tint again and coloured the leftover Aqua Cast and poured that in and gave it all a really good bang and a tap to get rid of any air bubbles. And then I left it for an hour before demoulding. Okay, so here it is out of the mould. And I think it's got a lovely subtle cloud effect. And that little stripe of silver just helps it to go well with the candle tray. I love Aqua Cast because you mix it with water. You don't get such a bubble problem as you do with the two-part casting compounds. It's just so much more fluid. And look, there's no bubbles around the rim that you would get more often anyway with the two-part casting compounds. Okay, back to the tray. Now then, I've got something to tell you first. I hadn't intended to use temporary tattoos at the beginning of the project. It was something I decided to do because I thought there was too much blue and it just, I don't know, it needed something extra. But the problem is, after I'd finished the tray, I sealed it with my wax that I like to use. And yeah, we all know, don't we? Things don't stick well to wax. So adding a wax sealer before adding temporary tattoos was not a good idea. Oh, well, it did work. It just took me a long time to get them to stick. If you're using temporary tattoos, I would recommend using a Jesmonite sealer or the Hydroflow sealer from Elichem. It's much better for, if you're using the tattoos. But you do really need to seal it before you add tattoos. So, right. Okay, this was I think it was my first attempt with tattoos. I've done a few things with them recently and I really do like them. So all you do is you take off the protective film, place it down where you want it, and then press down with a wet sponge or paper towel until it's completely saturated, then remove it. It should be very simple. Like I say, it wasn't so much for me because of the wax issue, but you live and you learn, don't you? The other thing I found a little bit tricky was the fact that, you can't see through them to see where you're placing them. So I did trim around the edges so I knew kind of where they would be placed, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I eventually got it off and then just carried on with some more of the same kind of design of tattoo. The tattoos are from Amazon and I'll leave a link in the description for you. Right, I learned my lesson from sealing the tray with the wrong stuff. And for the candle vessel, I used my Hydroflow sealant and sprayed it all over and just carefully rubbed it in with a little makeup sponge. And I didn't film adding the tattoo to this, but I can tell you quite confidently that it worked perfectly. I wish I had filmed it. Obviously you've got to leave your sealant completely dry, but once that was completely dry, the tattoo went on so nicely. It's a little bit tricky when you've got a curved shape, but it still went on good, so I was really pleased with the result. I would recommend, after applying your tattoos, to add another 2 coats of sealant. For the tray, I had to use wax again because I'm not sure that the Hydroflow sealant would have worked well on top of the initial layer of wax I used on that tray. But with the candle vessel, I just used the Hydroflow sealant on top of the tattoos. Once it was sealed, I added a wooden wick and some natural beeswax to create my candle. Someone was asking me how I make how I do all of that. I'm not really good enough at it yet. I'm still finding problems with the candle making. But when I've perfected it, I will definitely do a video showing you how to do it well. Because, I do keep making some mistakes. To finish it off, I decided to use a tassel and a bead. The tassel is made from leather. It's one of those leather cords you get for jewellery making. And I just cut a length of that and threaded it through the hole in the board and then through the bead. I made the bead a long time ago using polymer clay, and I really liked it and thought it would go really well with the candle tray. It was a little bit tricky to thread the cord through, but I found that if you keep giving it a little push and twisting, and then a push and twisting, eventually it gets through. It's just a case of twist, 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 and it will get there in the end. Then I just secured it with a knot and it was finished, and I think that just finished the whole thing off really nicely. So there it is, all finished, and I'm really pleased with the result. What do you think? I think it's quite cool. And I think the effect that you get from layering and shaking the powder over the top like that is really unique, and I would like to do a little bit more of that on something else. So once again, we've reached the end of the video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you could click the thumbs up button, because that would really help me. I've just also reached 50,000 subscribers, which is very exciting, and I would really appreciate that extra subscription from you to help me along the way to my next goal. And that's it for now. So I will say goodbye, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now.